Hi, my name's Dr. Erika Nagorske. This presentation is planning for drought. When we originally started working on it, it was called dealing with drought. And I think as we discussed as a group, it's more about planning for drought, right? You want to be more proactive instead of reactive, because that's how you're going to be successful in whatever challenges are ahead. So little introductions, we'll all kind of take turns coming up. Dr. Mike Fanning, who's the head of our crop insurance. Dr. Monty Kerley, who's a senior ruminant nutritionist. And then Dr. Erika Nagorske with Southwest Veterinary Services, which is FBAN's official partner. Alrighty, you're up, Mike. I think you shut me off before I walk down.
Is this live? Yep. All right, good switch and everything. Great. Appreciate everybody coming for this session where we're going to talk about planning for drought. What all will it detail and stuff? Drought management planning, feed, and then health consequences will be Dr. Nagorske's section and stuff. What I'm going to talk about is trying to think about what goes into developing a drought management plan and stuff. We always need to assess the weather and the pasture assessment and its current conditions, and then based on what we think weather's going to do is kind of what pasture conditions will be. So then we can assess stocking rates, things like that. Part of the drought management plan needs to be able to talk about cow herd decisions, just not what the pasture does, but if we do have to do destock, then who do we destock? How do we destock? When do we destock type stuff? So a lot of things to be considering. And then last thing I'll visit about is some risk management and rancher assistance options that are available through the USDA. So when we're assessing weather, we want to look at the amount of precipitation, okay? That's how much did you get? And during the winter months, that precipitation is important, whether it's snowpack or actual rainfall, because that's going to build up soil moisture for coming to the spring. So when things are starting for that spring growth, we've got the soil moisture to allow grasses to start that initial growth period before we get into the actual full-blown growing season and needing precipitation to further that growth. Then you got spring and early summer times to assess is how much and is it going to be sufficient to grow grass for the number of cows that you have, okay? We've got to look at our carrying capacity and our stocking rate. We don't want to be overstocked, even going into the season, because then if we do run into a drought situation, we're really going to be hurt for carrying capacity and forage availability. Only about amount, but the timing of the precipitation is important. In the springtime, you want to review prior year's rainfall to see if you were droughty then, it's going to continue to be droughty, so now we're really lacking precipitation. If you have a dormant season, you don't have forages growing year-round, so maybe you're strictly a summer grasses. You look over the winter time to see how much precipitation you have to be able to kickstart your summer annuals. If you got not summer annuals, but summer forages. If you've got winter forages, then the precipitation is important throughout the entire time of the year and stuff. Come spring and early summer for your summer forages, now we got to look at what are they projecting. Is it going to be above average temperatures, normal temperatures? And then what's the rain forecast? Is it going to be droughty, or are we expecting some rain throughout the particular growing season for our forages? And the drought monitor is usually pretty good at indicating situations to be able to assess that. So now we've looked at the weather, we kind of think we know what's going to happen. Of course, we're never 100% sure of the weather. So now we want to assess our pastures. How much forage is out there? Is it good quality forage? Okay. Is it going to be enough forage to carry my current herd size? Okay. Then as the growing season comes along, you may want to start looking at doing forage estimations, going out there and trying to measure how much forage is actually growing. Or if you're monitoring your rainfall and every year I get a certain amount of rainfall, I get this amount of forage, that'll be perfectly fine, well, as if that's your assessment for forage availability for carrying capacity. And then another thing to think about is always forage testing, because just because you have forage out there, it may not be good quality forage, and you may need to do some supplementing to get you to meet the nutritional needs of the animals based on their production, stage of production. And as we're coming into the grazing season, also we need to look at limited or forecasted limited forage for the grazing season. If it's not going to be there, then let's consider destocking ahead of time to be able to utilize efficiently the forage that is to be out there and available. If you have reduced forage intake, then we need to look at supplemental feeding. There's some different options that are listed. Those are not an inclusive list, just some things that you could feed: hay, range cubes, liquid feed. If you're in an area that's got crop residue, maybe then you can run them out there on some crop residue and stuff. So now we've assessed the weather, we've looked at kind of pasture conditions. Now we have to know what the herd's doing, okay? And if you're not keeping records, it's going to be really kind of hard to make culling decisions beyond she's open, let's send her off, she's old, let's send her off, okay? So some things to think about is you got to be collecting data, you know, calves, weaning weights, her productivity numbers and everything, okay? It's obvious, you cull open cows. That's your first thing. However, why is she open? Does she have a calf by her side? Does not? How did she lose that calf? It may have been her fault, may have not been her fault, okay? Without that information, how do you know between two cows, their body condition, they're both open, but why? What happened? And type stuff. Some other things to consider when culling animals, when you're making decisions, is lameness, bad udders, bad feet, something like that. So why would you want to keep her around if you got a better producing cow that you can keep? And while all making these decisions, you're trying to maintain that genetic base that you've built up over years. You'd hate to throw away all that investment in that cow herd and all those genetics, okay? So it's very important that we're keeping records so we can know which animals to cull. One thing too is assessing, you got to know the body condition scores, and you assess their body condition score, then you can break them into feeding groups based on body condition scores. You don't want to be feeding 3s and 4s the same as you're feeding 5s and 6s. If you got 7s, you know, you definitely probably don't want to feed them. So different nutrient requirements for the different stage of production in their body conditions. So if you have the ability, you'd like to sort them into body condition scores groups and feed them accordingly. And I'm not saying you need to do each one by themselves. You know, 3s and 4s you can group together, 5s and 6s, and then 7 and aboves, you know, kind of your sorting. Another option with cow herd decision is early weaning calves. You know, let's ship those calves a little earlier than we normally do so we can get them off, and they're not now, as they're getting older, competing for that available forage with the cows. And some things that we forget about too is culling bulls. Throughout the years, you're culling bulls, whether it's age, maybe they got some structural issues with them and stuff, maybe it's just normal time to rotate them out of the herd. So instead of culling some of the cows, maybe you now remove some of those bulls that you don't intend on keeping for next breeding season. So now that allows for more forage to be able to maintain, you know, hold on to another cow you have rather than using that forage for the bull. So those are management, production type decisions. Now, what I'm going to switch to and finish up with is some risk management options. And these are some insurance or some government programs that can assist during times of drought that would pay some insurance payments or provide some type of financial relief, because then you can use those money to potentially buy feedstuffs, the hay, and things like that, to then try to maintain your herd size. There's a program called Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage. Probably everybody knows, it's familiar with insurance, PRF insurance. Just bringing it up so you know it's a tool that's available. Sales closing, the availability to buy it ended on the 1st of December for 2023 coverage. But basically, it's covering for the lack of precipitation in 2-month intervals throughout the year for perennial forages, whether it's grazing land or hay land. And then parts of the U.S., there's a program called Annual Forage, which is basically the same as the PRF program, but it's for those annually planted forages that's used for feed and fodder, such as wheat, triticale. There's also some summer grasses like Sudan and millets. And then through the USDA Farm Service Agency, you have the LFP, or Livestock Forage Disaster Program, and also ELAP that covers cost of transport, feed, or livestock. With the insurance, the PRF, and the annual forage, those payments are made throughout the year based on losses during that 2-month period. With the FSA programs, those usually come later, not throughout the year that you need them, but the following year, because it takes them a while to assess, because it's based on a certain amount of time and the drought ratings that are recorded for that time period and stuff. But those are options available to you. So to summarize, and in my part of the talk, is have a drought management plan. If you don't have one, you can work with local USDA office like the National Natural Resource Conservation Service, work with one of their grazing specialists to develop a grazing drought management plan to be able to refer to and to use if you get into a droughty situation. That way you've got a plan to know what you need to do or would potentially do under a given situation. Now, to build that plan and make those decisions, you need data. You got to have the data. You got to know how those pastures perform under the different situations and how your cattle are performing and stuff, so you can make those culling decisions appropriately, so you're just not grabbing a bunch of cows that are in poor condition, or they're all in poor condition, and then you just start culling, because you may be culling productive cows under normal conditions versus non-productive cows you're keeping and stuff. So plan, have data to be able to develop that plan, and then implement the plan as needed. So next we're going to have Dr. Kerley, who's going to be talking about the nutrition side when it comes to planning drought.
Thank you, sir. All right, so what we want to do here is drill down a little bit into food quality and go back and review some of the supplement, building a supplement stuff that we talked about the previous talk. To me, forage availability in a drought comes down to 3 things. We either have to get an alternative to hay, and then we're curious about the cost of it, or managing that. We have to purchase hay, and then forage quality is really important. And then if we extend hay, so can we supplement the hay and get it to go a bit further? I think most of you are familiar with this, but it's benchmarks that I like to go by. I got 70 pounds in body weight is one body condition score. So when I think about if I want that cow to be a body condition score no lower than 5 when she goes into breeding season, then I've got to figure out how I'm going to get her to that point, or get her to keep her in that condition score when she goes into breeding. I can't remember now if I've got it at the end, but I want to highlight that here so you know the kind of the foundation I come from. Once I get that cow bred, she's going to stay bred. So the thing I like is I come through the winter, and I'm Southern Illinois, so we have a cool season grass forage that we work with down there. But if I get her through the winter and she loses weight, once she's bred, I'll let her do it. And don't say I don't care about it, but I will let her get through the winter and do part of the work. Reason being is she's safe with calf. I come into spring grass, and what happens to her body condition when I get into spring grass? She gets to put a lot of that back on, right? So when you hear me banging the gongs here about body condition score and feeding them like that, our whole goal is to get that girl bred. And after that, then she can work with us quite a bit. Lactation requires groceries. So we know that, but the point being is milk's going to suck it out of her, right? It's going to take tissue off of her. Now she'll pull back some on milk, but her goal is to feed that calf. Creep feeding, if you choose to creep feeding, research is pretty solid on this. When I give that calf a creep feed, the calf eats creep feed. It doesn't eat as much hay or whatever it is I'm feeding the cow, but the calf's still going to pull down as much milk as it was off of that cow. So what I'm doing by creep feeding is, I'm certainly can help the calf some, but what I'm doing is if she's still got some range she's grazing on or pasture or the hay I'm putting out, she's just going to have a little bit more of that. And then early weaning, so this was, 15 years ago, really got in vogue or what have you on the research side, but we know we can pull those calves off as early as 2 to 3 months to give her some help. Energy, so I want to take a second and talk about this. Fiber or starch. So the bugs in the rumen, there's one class of bugs that'll ferment starch. There's one class of bugs that's going to ferment fiber. The fiber bugs are the wimpy guys on the block in the rumen. The starch guys will kick them all over the place. So if we go out and we put a lot of starch in that diet, the starch-fermenting bacteria go crazy. They lower the pH, and the fiber guys can't survive in that, or they can't survive as well. That's negative associative effects we've talked about for a long time. The thing that's interesting is if we go into the limited amount of starch, then we get some growth, or at least this is how I think it happens. We get some growth of the starch-fermenting bacteria. These starch-fermenting bacteria, they're tougher than the fiber guys, but they will make things that the fiber guys need for growth. So if we have a limited amount of starch that we give to that animal, we'll actually see fiber digestibility increase. We'll see more microbial cells grow in that rumen, so more microbial protein and more amino acids from the bugs will go out of that rumen, and that cow or that heifer has to use them. That sweet spot in there is about 0.2% of body weight. So if you've got a heifer that's 7 weights, that's 750 pounds, that's 1.5 pounds of corn that I'd give to her. Foundation, that's what I'm going to use to supplement her. 1,400-pound cow. How many people have got 1,400-pound cows? I always take a digress here. How many people have got 1,200-pound cows? Okay, now I'm going to tell you the truth. First talk I gave, I said, remember the word homeostasis, right? That's the take-home thing from here. Everybody that thinks they got a 1,200-pound cow actually owns a 1,400-pound cow. And everybody that thinks they have a 1,400-pound cow, you're just too embarrassed to say you've got several cows, 1,800 pounds, that walks across the scale whenever you're working, right? That's the true weight of these cattle. So think about that when you use this 0.2 to 0.3% of body weight, right? But the point of that is I like that as a foundation. If I've got a problem with forage quality, if I've got a problem with limited forage, I like this as a foundation because that's going to help me get more out of that limited forage. After that, though, I don't want any starch going in that rumen because I don't want to have a down or a negative effect on fiber digestibility. Now, if we want to talk about corn pricing, its availability, and those kind of things can make corn have a different value to you. But if I'm simply talking about nutrition, after that amount of corn, I want a high fiber, digestible fiber that goes into that. And that's why the byproduct soy hulls, corn gluten feed, wheat midge will have a little starch in it, but typically not enough to hurt. But I'll go grab those three. I know some guys will use distiller's grain, so you get a cost that can work. But the other thing is if you go out and you're going to buy hay, and then we'll talk about quality in a second. But anyway, first kind of guideline here is how much starch I'm going to let go into that diet. Right amount can help fiber digestibility. Too much will hurt it. Forage quality. I think a couple things are important in here. So NDF is a measure of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. That's for Trivial Pursuit. Important thing about the NDF test you get back is it's the best correlate we have to intake. It's not perfect. There's a lot of noise in that. But it's the best thing I have to guesstimate how much forage that animal can eat. So what we go with is we assume that cow or heifer or whatever can eat 1.2% of its body weight in NDF. ADF takes hemicellulose out of the equation. It gives you the cellulose and lignin. Anytime you get back an ME and NEM, NEG on a forage. They didn't measure NEG in the forage. They used ADF, plugged it into an equation, and it comes back, and that's where you get your energy. ADF is correlated to digestibility of a forage. So intake, we can calculate what we think the forage intake is going to be by 120 divided by the percent NDF. So if I have a forage that's 42% NDF, good quality or poor quality forage at 42 NDF? That's really good stuff, all right? This is vegetative stuff that I cut and baled up or ensiled or whatever. If it's got 42% NDF in it, then by calculation, that cow can eat 2.9% of her body weight. If it's 72% NDF, that cow can only consume 1.7% of her body weight. Now, in the talk before this, we talked about milk production. If I've got a cow, that cow's trying to make 20 pounds of milk. Now I even put that into a 2-year-old, she's still trying to grow. Do you think there's a difference between 2.9 and 1.7% of body weight intake? Huge difference in the amount of groceries that she's going to be able to get. Protein, nitrogen. So energy, form of energy, thinking about forage quality, what NDF, what ADF tells us, form of nitrogen. Another rule that I use is if 6 to 8%, a forage has to be 6 to 8% crude protein to meet the bacterial requirement for ammonia. So the bugs in the rumen that ferment the fiber or the forage that she's eating, they have to have ammonia. Only way that they can get nitrogen to make amino acids, that they can make more microbial cells and all that work in the rumen, they've got to have ammonia. If that forage is less than 6 or 8% protein, and almost every warm season grass or range forage that you're going to harvest is going to be below 6% protein, those bugs have got to have ammonia. So if I wanted, first step I do is I adjust that diet, and I've got this hay that's 6 or 4% protein, and I want to get that hay up to 7% protein. The cheapest thing I have to go out and grab is urea or non-protein nitrogen source. So I'm going to do that, tub, liquids, dry feed, however. I'm going to go out, and the first thing I'm going to do is adjust that diet up to around 7% protein with ammonia. That's what the bugs need. If I give them a protein that's got 10% protein, they only needed 4% to get those bugs up, but that 10% came as NPN. That 6% in there is toxic to the cow. That goes, the urea goes in the rumen, snap of the fingers, it goes to ammonia, that gets absorbed across the rumen wall. That blood takes the ammonia to the liver, and the liver makes urea out of it. If it didn't do that, the ammonia concentration in the blood would kill the animal. So dairy people look at either milk urea nitrogens or blood urea nitrogens, they get some assessment of where the protein in the diet is for the dairy cow. If that cow has to take that nitrogen, ammonia, and make urea out of it, she had to use ATP to do that. What that means is it's energy cost to her. Last thing I want that cow doing when she's trying to make milk, she's trying to get a reproductive tract back together and all that stuff, last thing I want to do is feed her something that's going to cause an increased energy cost to her so that she doesn't die from a toxin, if you will. All that's an advertisement to say when you go out with a supplement and you go out and you look for 2 supplements, and one maybe you're doing a liquid and one's got 20, one's got 40 or 32% protein in it. Almost all the liquids are going to bring that in as NPN. Make certain you need the NPN, because if you don't, you've just added the cost that she has to contend with. All right, 2 months since calving, this cow's in peak lactation. She has a requirement for 30 megacows of ME. She needs 37 pounds of alfalfa to do that with an NDF level of 58 or less. She needs 21 pounds of corn to do that. Just talking about energy, not protein here. 5 months since calving, she's past peak milk early in conception. She only needs 26 megacows. Milk production's down. She's not at the point yet that this calf's sucking a lot of energy out of her, right? The last 60 days or so, Erika, is when most of this growth in the calf occurs at. 26 megacows, 32 pounds of alfalfa dry matter, 18 pounds of corn. We go 12 months since calving, half a pound average daily gain growth by the cow, 34 megacows, 42 pounds of alfalfa, 24 pounds of corn. So what's the point of all that? The point I want to make is when you think about going out there and you're putting forage in front of her, one is these cows in lactation, beef cows in lactation, will be bumping 3% of body weight if they can eat to what the demand they have for milk and what have you. And so not only on offer do they have enough forage to do that with, or if they don't have the quality of the forage they had out there. When I was at the University of Missouri, never failed. Every winter, somewhere around February, I'd get at least 2 calls a winter. Somebody would say Monty, I got my cows. My cows are starting to die. And I said, well, is it no, it's not respiratory. I said, well, we go through it. I give them all the hay they want, but they got these big bellies and they'll still die. And it was fescue. So if any of you grew up in the Southeast, you know what problems fescue has with it. But when they do some of these tests, these forages would be like an 80% NDF, and they might be 9% protein. These cows couldn't get the groceries in them even to meet the demands they had for maintenance and where milk was putting at them. Important concept. Cost of energy. I showed this earlier, but I wanted to go through it again. We talked about $257 a ton corn, $7.20 a bushel. I think that catches most places. Look at the last 3 down there. Alfalfa at 42 NDF, 58 NDF. If I look at those two, the comparative price for that better alfalfa is $182 a ton. For the poorer quality alfalfa is $146 a ton. And the problem is, and I think we'll get into this in a second, going through the balancing thing again, but the problem with that is that lower quality alfalfa couldn't even meet the needs we talked about earlier. But the other take-home point to that is it's hard to buy alfalfa hay for that price right now, right? So I'm real interested. I'm going to go up and grab corn and maybe another byproduct if I have a problem. Brome hay, 71 NDF, $161 a ton or less is what that hay would have to be for what I could buy corn for. And a lot of times I think we look at this, and again, it kind of goes to our whole thing, talk about cost of gain. We're talking about cost of energy here, not per ton of hay, but cost of energy. All right, so building a supplement, really the same things as the last talk that I gave, but to go through this rather quickly. Talking about the brome hay, 71 NDF, same thing I had in the previous slide. We talked about the metabolizable energy requirement of that girl, 30 megacows. And I used a 1,400-pound cow giving 18 pounds of milk is what the energy demand for her was. And so we do our calculation there. The third bullet item down, the 120 divided by 71, means that cow can get 24 pounds of dry matter. And if I look at the energy, that gives me 21.6 megacows. She's 8.4 megacows short. So if I'm going to make that up off of her back, the estimate there would be 2.6 pounds of body weight loss per day. Now she's going to pull back some on milk, so it won't be as drastic as 2.6. But if I don't feed this cow, from your own experience, what happens to her body condition score? I mean, it's going to go down, right? Now, if I'm wanting her to get bred, then it's worth me feeding to prevent that. If she's bred, though, then she's going to earn, I'm going to make her earn part of her keep, right? And so what's that whole advertisement there? Whole advertisement is, again, give her the best shot at getting bred. But after that work is done, then engage her in helping you get to when you're going to have that spring forage for her to consume. Then the second bullet item down, that gets into our corn. So 0.2% of body weight is 2.8 or 3 pounds of corn that she's going to get today. And then that gives me about, 4 megacows. I'm still 4.4 megacows short. That's where I'm going to go out and find this higher fiber, but digestible fiber supplement. Soy hulls, corn gluten feed, Mids, if I get a good buy on it, I can put distillers in there, or I'm going to go out and look at can I get good quality hay bought for what will do that. So summary, cost of energy, forage quality, really there, NDF and crude protein. Think about supplement effects and what that does on, and really our focus there is on fiber digestibility, and then the type of protein. Know when you can use an NPN source, that's far cheaper than a plant or animal protein you're going to buy. But once you give the bugs what they need, ain't nothing left there the cow can use, and it's actually going to hurt her. The good doctor.
Alrighty. Whoever thought a nutritionist and vet could share a stage, huh? All right, I'm going to touch a little bit on animal health consequences with drought. So the main things I think of in drought are pregnancy rate, colostrum quality, milk production, which leads right into calf growth, and then parasite challenges. So for pregnancy rate, you know, when you think of drought, it can be both heat stress and poor nutrition, as Dr. Kerley alluded to. There can be a big range in the decrease in pregnancy rate, anywhere from 3 to 40%. So it really depends on how hot it gets and other heat abatement measures you have on your farm, as well as how bad the nutrition gets. So for heat stress, the way that affects pregnancy rate is you're going to have early embryonic death loss, which is pretty hard to realize is going on in beef cattle until all of a sudden your calving window gets really stretched out. Your bulls are going to have reduced sperm quality and fertility. Now for poor nutrition, with limited forage and or poor forage quality, you're going to have a delayed return to estrus. That cow isn't going to want to cycle. She's not going to want to put her energy into cycling. You will have a reduced pregnancy rate in cycling cows. So the cows that are cycling aren't going to want to settle because those nutrients are just going to living, not to settling a pregnancy. And then with your bulls, you will see a decrease in fertility. So this is an interesting little table which talks about the impact of body condition score at calving. And I'd want to pay attention specifically to the first calf heifers because I think it's the most drastic. So if you go down from a body condition score from 4, 5, and 6, you can see at 60 days, your body condition 4 girls, only 50% of them, 56, are going to be pregnant. But if they're a 6, you know, that 5 or 6 where we want them to be, you're almost at 100%. So especially those heifers that are trying to grow while get pregnant, it's really important to fine-tune your nutrition program and make sure that they're at the right body condition score. Colostrum quality, one of my favorite discussions, I think, on dairy cattle or beef cattle. You know, a little review on colostrum, that's that first milk that's very antibody rich for that calf, and it provides the calf with an immune system until they can develop their own, which can take quite a few weeks. So that cow's colostrum is really the best fighting chance that that calf has at a good, healthy life. So if that mama cow has poor body condition, that's going to be an issue for not only quality of colostrum, but quantity, which is really important. So she might have decent quality, but if she's not producing enough for that calf to get passive transfer or enough colostrum, then you're going to have a problem. Now, poor colostrum leads to weak calves, right? You might have more scouring events, which can lead to respiratory, and then you'll have reduced weaning weights, reduced feedlot performance once they get to the feed yard, and then poor carcass traits. It really can be a spiral effect through that entire calf's growing period if it's not addressed. I do think it's good to keep in mind that calves that have a scour event are 2.5 times more likely to have a respiratory event in their life, specifically pre-weaning. So if you have a really bad year with scours, get ready for an uptick in respiratory disease. Milk production. So milk production is also a little variable. It can drop by 10 to 40% during heat stress, and that's probably just off of a water intake. relationship between water intake and milk production. But the average beef cow produces 1.5 gallons of milk a day. And the majority of this, like Dr. Kerley alluded to, is in the first 60 days of that lactation. So if we wanted to do some cowboy math, and just make it easy, let's say a calf gains 2 pounds a day in the first 60 days. In drought, if mama's milk production drops by 40%, and we're kind of assuming a 1-for-1 ratio of that, they're down to 1.2 pounds a day for gains. That's almost 50 pounds in the first 60 days of life. And I think we all know that that calf is never going to get that back, right? That's always going to be a smaller calf that isn't as efficient as everybody else that had a really good start to their growing period. Now, we can't forget about parasite challenges. I think that's an easy one to forget about. So overgrazing of pastures can lead to increased parasite challenges. In reality, parasites crawl out of poop that the cow has out on pasture, and those little larvae crawl onto grass blades. And so if the cows are overgrazing and eating too close to the ground, they have a bigger chance of coming across those parasites and picking them up. So make sure to work with your veterinarian, even in years where you don't have drought, but years where you just have to overstock one of your pastures and they got overgrazed. For a pour-on and oral deworming strategy, fecal egg counts is a really great tool where you can sample some patties, fecal patties out on pasture, and see what is your worm load before you get really excited about a program. And then pasture rotation is another great tool. And that was it. If you guys want to come join me for some questions. It's kind of short and sweet on the animal health side. Does anyone have any questions on all of that, or are you guys ready to break loose? Oh, we got one.
It's hard to...
2 questions. What do you think are I guess back up, if you can clarify the difference between a conception rate and a preg rate. You didn't mention conception rate up there. And then from an improvement standpoint, if you're going to look at one or the other, what would you do? Look at conception rate or preg rate? And then the second question is, are there any critical vitamins or minerals to consider in a drought condition in ahead or during a breeding season?
Sure. I'll answer that conception rate versus pregnancy rate question. So conception rate is, out of all the cattle that breed, how many of them essentially get pregnant, yes or no? Pregnancy rate is going to be a more defined 21-day period. So out of all the cattle that are eligible to become pregnant in that 21-day period, how many of them settle that pregnancy? So when you think of conception rate, that would be a little bit more on the bull's contribution to things as well. And it kind of just depends on what most beef cattle herds probably go by conception rate year to year, but it depends on how you want to look at your reproductive program.
You don't realize how qualified Dr. Nagorske is to answer that question. She's 2 weeks back off of maternity leave.
Yes.
So the minerals, excellent question. As you asked that, I should have had that in what we talked about. So what I like to do is I like to have 2 different minerals, right? What I call low quality forage and high quality forage. And I don't understand, some of the companies, they've come out and they'll do like 2 or 3 times your trace mineral requirement in products that they sell. And I have no clue what the nutrition validity of that is. I think there's a little bit of a marketing race that went on there, right? So when we put our free choice minerals, all of our products together, we've separated that in low quality and high quality. So if you have a high quality forage, which is low NDF, some vegetative, forage, good leaf and legume, good grass and the warm, cool season grass you have, real frankly, a lot of the time, at least 3/4 and probably most of your trace minerals can get met in that. Now, if you're in an area that you've got deficiency of like selenium or whatever, that, you know, that wouldn't be true, obviously. But you'll get a lot of it. Low quality forages, we think about NDF being high, so forage intake goes down. And think about, I think I had contrast like 2.9% of body weight intake and 1.7 based on NDF, right? So the amount of minerals, I would look at that based off of your forage quality. If you have low quality, then I want a mineral, whatever my mineral product I'm feeding them, I want the trace minerals to come in through that mineral product. Go ahead.
The question is, what would be the key minerals and vitamins?
So one is a level, and then I would say all the trace minerals. Copper, zinc, selenium, manganese in particular. Iodine can run short. What I'm a big believer in is, it's hard for me to show a growth response or a growth depression if I short trace minerals for growing cattle. I don't care when I do that to a cow, if I short her on those trace minerals, I'll see that whenever the next breeding season is. And so I want the whole suite of those, copper, zinc, selenium, and manganese in there.
Okay, so on the vitamin side, what's typically needs to be supplemented more because of a drought forage? For the pre-productive standpoint.
Yep.
What would they be?
In a drought? In a drought?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Going into breeding season.
Same minerals and vitamin A.
Just vitamin A?
Yeah, D and E. D will come along for the trip, and we'll put that in at the requirement. What I've never been, what I don't think it's been researched well is, we have a cow and she's outside, and so how often do we see a D deficiency, right? And E's, there's a big question mark about requirements for E in my mind. So most products will have E in there that you'll meet 25 to 50% of requirement. A is important. I would have that in there at the requirement, and then those suite of trace minerals.
So there's enough E in drought hay?
Yeah, when I've seen vitamin E problems, actually, Erika can talk about it when she's seen like E or selenium deficiencies, white muscle or what have you. Whenever I've seen that, it's oftentimes gone along with that calf has had some stress in the gut, or lamb, typically from a high starch diet. So I think some things went on there with, maybe some antagonisms or production of vitamin E or what have you, destruction of it. But the E real frankly just has a question mark. And what most of us will do is we'll meet a fraction of the requirement, because E is one of the things that it makes the cost of that mineral go through the roof. And we have evidence that we just don't see a lot of E deficiency problems out there. Now, Erika?
Yeah, I'd agree. Definitely more in confinement hogs or small ruminants.
Yeah, but I'm a big believer in A. I'm a big believer in the trace minerals and the full suite of them. And A, I can't say so much, but with the trace minerals, I think even if you're 3 or 4 months out and you short the cow, typically what you see is breeding season lengthen. So when she showed like what period or day you get bred, you may still wind up with a pretty good percentage bred, but I think you'll push some of that percentage to further into the breeding season, which affects weaning weight of the calf, right? Does that answer your question? Yep.
I got a couple of things for you. I don't know who answers this, but how long does the larva live outside the manure?
I'd probably say a solid week or two. I think it really depends on which bug and the moisture level on that grass, right, that blade of grass, because if it's going to dry out, it's not going to live as long.
Where we lived, it was severe drought issues, so we had to fight that fight. We had to
Right.
I thought it was a week or two, though, wasn't it?
Yep. I think, again, it really depends on moisture and sunlight of the grass that they can be on, but I think just the take home is as you're overgrazing, the closer they are to that manure and the closer they are to that migrating larva. So their exposure is just, where if that larva has to climb up a blade of grass that's that tall, it's probably going to die before it gets there, right?
Our burger, we rotate every day, so I was just wondering how long I have before I came back and we did it.
Right.
The doctor on the I think I got this from you years ago. We don't use that $1 mineral that everybody fell prey to. We get a regular mineral, we add selenium, iodine, and other vitamins when needed, and it has worked wonders in cabbage. And no foot rots and that.
And you got that from me years ago?
I think we bought your book a long time ago, or in a
But-
Grass Farmer magazine.
And by golly, it was right. That's what I can say.
We've been doing it probably for 25 years, and it's money, and it doesn't cost near $40 everybody's paying. Maybe at best, 26. So we keep that out of your record. Oh, I'll stand in the yard. But anyway, appreciate that, and I'll keep reading your stuff, and thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.
Gotta go to work.
Any other questions?
You mentioned the high ammonia or urea, like liquid feeds, how that sometimes they can work against the cow. So the salesman says they put an additive in there that limits how much they'll eat. Is that true, or is that a sales pitch, or does that really work?
Yeah, so is this for like a supplement?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're trying to regulate them at what, 2 to 4 pounds or something like that then?
I think that's right, around 2 probably.
Yeah, so I think, probably so correct me if I'm going down the wrong trail here, but so most of those products, if you look at that, I think Purina probably came out with the first one. They came out with, what was it, Impact, and then it went to AccuRation, right? And then other companies, kind of followed suit with that. What they'll use is, they'll have Ruminant. I know Purina would, no matter what price did, fish oil stayed constant in their formula. And then they'll use some, I think some potassium salts and some of those salts in there. So I think they work pretty good. Well, I don't know if I believe that or not. They will get kind of close to what they say, right? What I've never liked about that is, on average, they do. But if you look at individuals in your group, you got one animal eating here and another one eating down here. It's kind of like you and I. You probably don't eat as much garlic on your eggs as I eat, right? And so I'm wanting to be nice and gentle, but I don't agree with with that approach because of the range you get in there. Now, with that being said, if you're not set up, or the cost, it's not worth the cost to limit feed daily, or what have you, then they have some, I think that has some benefit in there. But I'm not a big fan because of where I think it has the nutrient balancing at, if that makes any sense.
So even with that, they can still work against themselves like you're talking.
Yeah, so, well, and if they come in with urea, it can for sure, if they're going to overeat the urea. Now, if they're using like a true protein, a vegetable protein, then the worst thing you're going to do is she's going to eat a little extra protein. But that doesn't have the energy cost to it that ammonia does from urea. And biuret, they may have biuret going into that, what they're talking about, a slow release. And it really has kind of the same thing, that the rate of that ammonia release is slower in the rumen, but once you exceed what the bugs need, you've exceeded what the bugs need. And then the cow has to contend with that after that.
I got a question. The way we do things, I try to stockpile grass, and when the drought hit, all of our best grasses just dried out in the field. What kind of nutritional value does that still have?
So mainly what you had left was fescue then, right?
No, I had Bermuda, Dallas grass, but our range is turned off for like 2.5 months starting in August.
Yeah, so actually, this is, I mean, I don't know the answer to your question specifically, but it doesn't keep me from answering it, right? Actually, I could paint a picture where if that plant, it got so dry, that plant desiccated, that it didn't go all the way to maturity, that plant is better than if you'd gone through your normal procedure where you let it stockpile and then you go out there and you graze it. Because when that plant quit growing, the fiber in that plant wasn't going to change. So it's as good down the road as it is right now.
So basically it's standing hay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's the
Wouldn't be any different if you cut it and put it up as hay.
Okay, it answered. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't get a forage test, that way you can't prove me wrong. Any other questions?
Don't want to keep them from happy hour.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much for
Thank
coming
you.
and look forward to seeing you later
Come
on this
find
week.
us. Yep.
And